This conference will now be recorded.
అది పంపించమని చెప్పాలి అటెండెన్స్ చాట్ బాక్స్ కి. Good morning, everyone. The topic for today is one is adrenal insufficiency and second one is pheochromocytoma. Okay, last class I have told you introduction to adrenals and Cushing syndrome. Okay, Cushing syndrome is because of excess secretion of cortisol. Okay, but adrenal insufficiency is due to insufficient secretion of cortisol or aldosterone or adrenal sex hormones. Now coming to adrenal insufficiency, there are two types. One is primary and secondary. Primary is called Addison's disease. Okay, the causes includes autoimmune adrenalitis, which is because of polyglandular autoimmune syndrome, infectious, which is TB or HIV or syphilis or disseminated fungal infection, metastatic cancer, which basically can be from either lung, breast, stomach, CA colon, or lymphoma. There's something called adrenal hemorrhage or infarction, congenital adrenal hyperplasia, adrenal leukodystrophy. I think you are able to see from here. Just a second. See, adrenal leukodystrophy and drugs. Basically, just a small line about adrenal leukodystrophy. Adrenal leukodystrophy is characterized by increased serum levels of VLDL. It's mainly common seen in boys than girls. Okay, and drugs. Drugs also can cause adrenal Addison's disease. The drugs which will cause includes ketoconazole, fluconazole, rifampicin, phenytoin, barbiturates, megestrol acetate, etomidate, metirapone, and metotane. Now coming to secondary adrenal insufficiency or tertiary adrenal insufficiency, basically this occurs due to two things. One is hypothalamic pituitary disease. First thing. Second thing is withdrawal of suppressive glucocorticoid therapy. Okay, in secondary adrenal insufficiency, there will be interference with secretion of ACTH, which is predominantly secreted by pituitary gland. Just a small recall, hypothalamus will secrete CRH, which will act on antipituitary. Antipituitary will produce ACTH, which will act on adrenal cortex. Adrenal cortex will then produce cortisol or aldosterone or sex hormone based on which and what action is necessary. Okay. Then coming to tertiary. Tertiary can be caused by interference with corticotropin releasing hormone secretion by hypothalamus. So primary is basically your adrenal cortex, secondary is your adrenal pituitary, third is your hypothalamus. Okay. Third instance tertiary. Now coming to clinical features. Clinical features occurs basically due to deficiency of the hormones, which can include both glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids, and adrenal steroid, 6 steroids. Okay. The predominant clinical features, they'll have weakness, they'll have tiredness, they'll have fatigue, anorexia, gastrointestinal symptoms like nausea, vomiting, constipation, abdominal pain, diarrhea. Okay. Then they have lymphocytosis and eosinophilia. Okay, remember electrolyte disturbances are very important. That is how you can differentiate between Cushing's, Addison's, and other things. Okay, here you will have hyponatremia, hyperkalemia, hypercalcemia, normocytic normochromic anemia. Okay, so three electrolyte disturbances are hyponatremia, hyperkalemia, hypercalcemia. But in Cushing's, you'll have hypokalemia and hyper or normal sodium. Okay, then coming to other symptoms, which includes weight loss, hyperpigmentation, hypotension, slightly increase in TSH, vitiligo, salt craving, postural dizziness, that is because of deficiency of your mineralocorticoids. Okay, muscle or joint pain, alabaster colored pale skin. Basically, hyperpigmentation and alabaster colored pale skin is because of POMC. Okay, actually the cortical hormones are derivative of POMC. Okay, POMC is produced first, which then is converted into ACTH, melanocyte inhibiting or stimulating hormone, and all. So, because of POMC, they can cause hyperpigmentation or you can have alabaster colored pale skin. Now coming to how do you diagnose? Okay, first and most important thing is you have to demonstrate that cortisol is low. Okay. Second thing is you have to determine whether cortisol deficiency is dependent or independent of ACTH. Third thing is you have to see any treatable cause of primary disease is there, like histoplasmosis or TB or AIDS or syphilis. Okay, any reversible cause like drugs and other things. Then first serum cortisol concentration. Early morning serum cortisol concentration usually at around 8 o'clock. If it is less than 80 nanomole per liter, it is strongly suggestive of adrenal insufficiency. Okay. Other things where you can measure are your salivary cortisol, that is morning, or urinary cortisol. Okay, that can be measured. But what to do is you have to be very cautious while you interpret the results, because cortisol is bound to globin or albumin, okay, such as the patient with cirrhosis or nephrotic syndrome or those taking estrogen disease can have like increased free cortisol, because there will be reduced globin or albumin production, so there won't be any binding. Then they can have increased free cortisol or they can have decreased free cortisol. So you should be very conscious that your liver, renal, and the patient is not taking estrogens, because these are altered with serum cortisol concentration. Now coming to your ACTH stimulation. So now you have proved that cortisol is deficient, that is by low cortisol. Now you have to see whether it is primary, secondary, or tertiary. Okay, so in primary, basically you'll have increased ACTH, but in secondary and tertiary you'll have low ACTH. Okay, now basically how do you do this? Something called ACTH stimulation test or synactin test. In that, what you do is you have to give 250 microgram of ACTH, and then you have to check serum cortisol levels. Okay, so how do you interpret that? In cortisol levels fail to increase in response to external ACTH in patients with primary or secondary, okay, can be distinguished by giving ACTH levels, and then you check the cortisol levels. If an ACTH assay is unavailable, then a long-acting ACTH stimulation test, that is, you have to give 1 mg depot ACTH IM daily for 3 days, and then you check. Okay. In secondary adrenal insufficiency, there is progressive increase in plasma cortisol with repeated ACTH administration, whereas in Addison's disease, cortisol still remains slow. Okay, so basically, what is this? What it is? In short, the synactin test, that is ACTH stimulation test, that is you give ACTH and see whether cortisol is increased or not. Okay, failure for the cortisol to increase can be either primary or secondary. First thing. Second thing is, in that case, if you want to, if you still think there is some, if you still think there is some deficiency, then you have to give cortisol for longer level. That is 1 mg depot preparation. You have to give for 3 days, and then again you have to check cortisol. If it is less than 25, then it's Addison's disease. If there is progressive increase, then it is secondary adrenal insufficiency. Okay, so this is a table. First, you have to suspect the patient is having adrenal insufficiency. How do you suspect? Based on symptoms like weight loss, fatigue, postal hypertension, hyperpigmentation, hyponatremia. Then you have to either screen or confirm. That is by cortisol levels screening. Confirmatory is by plasma cortisol levels 1 hour after giving 20 to 50 micrograms of cosintropin, IM or IV. Okay, so cortisol post cosintropin, if it is less than 450 or 500 nanomole, then it can be adrenal insufficiency. Okay, based on whether it's primary or secondary, you have to do ACTH, renin, and aldosterone. Okay, if it is primary, then there'll be high ACTH, there'll be high renin and low aldosterone. If it is secondary, your ACTH will be low, your renin will be normal, and your aldosterone will be normal. Okay, so primary is your cortisol low, your ACTH is high, your renin is high, and aldosterone is low. Coming to secondary, your ACTH is low or normal, but renin is normal and aldosterone is normal. Okay. In case of primary adrenal insufficiency, how do? You replace both glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids. Then you see for any antibodies are present. As I've told you, the most common cause is autoimmune. If it is positive, it can be autoimmune adrenalitis or autoimmune polygranular syndrome, which I'll tell you later what is meant by APS. If it is negative, then you have to see whether if there's any mass, if there's any infection, if there's any congenital adrenal hyperplasia. So for that case, you have to do chest X-ray. You have to see serum 17 hydroxyprogesterol or pregnenolone as a Then in men, you have to check for any increased levels of very long chain fatty acids and adrenal CT. Okay, in that, if it is positive, then positive in the sense if chest X-ray will show any infection or inflammation or infiltration, you can be TB or lymphoma, or sometimes you can have congenital hemorrhage, adrenal hemorrhage, or if there's increased 17-hydroxyprogesterone or pregnenolone, it can be congenital adrenal hyperplasia. Okay, but if any autoimmune antibodies and other things, like if very long chain fatty acids are increased, then it can be adrenoleukodystrophy, or if any antibodies are positive, then it can be autoimmune. So primary can be autoimmune or others. Others includes infections, infiltrations, hemorrhage, congenital adrenal hyperplasia, and adrenoleukodystrophy. Now coming to secondary, I have told you secondary is the pathology which is present at pituitary, and tertiary is at hypothalamus. So what you do there, you have to replace only glucocorticoids because your renin and aldosterone is always normal. Then you do MRI pituitary. If it is positive, then it can be hypothalamic pituitary mass lesion. If it is negative, it can be exogenous glucocorticoid treatment or any history of head trauma, or it can be isolated ACTH deficiency. Okay. This is the brief algorithm. How do you approach your patients of suspected adrenal insufficiency, and how do you treat? If you remember this, you can write it as a long question because adrenal insufficiency is a long question for you people. Okay, adrenal crisis. Adrenal crisis is the syndrome of adrenal insufficiency in adults may occur in the following situation. One is in previously undiagnosed patients with primary adrenal insufficiency who has been subjected to serious infection or major stress. First thing. Second thing is in a patient with known primary adrenal insufficiency who does not take more glucocorticoids during an infection or other malignancies. Always remember, if the patient is on steroids, the dose should be doubled in case of an infection. Okay, if the patient does not take also, then can have adrenal crisis. Okay, after bilateral adrenal infarction or hemorrhage, in a patient who abruptly stops from taking glucocorticoids also can cause adrenal insufficiency, but that is second, or they can have adrenal crisis. The clinical laboratory findings suggest adrenal crisis are dehydration, hypotension, nausea, vomiting, history of weight loss, anorexia, abdominal pain, so-called acute abdomen, unexplained hypoglycemia, unexplained fever, hyponatremia, hyperkalemia, hypercalcemia, hyperpigmentation, or vitiligo. How do you manage? Management is based on, for one thing, that is you have to always correct the volume depletion by giving IV saline, that is 1 liter per hour. Second thing is you have to replace your glucocorticoids, that is how you give IV hydrocortisone 100 mg stat, and you continue parenteral hydrocortisone, that is you can give 50 to 100 mg IM 6 hourly until the patient is well enough for reliable oral therapy. And as I have told you, they can have hypoglycemia, so you have to correct with 10% glucose. You have to identify and treat underlying cause, like if there's any persistent infection or if there's any TB or lymphoma, you have to treat the underlying cause. Okay. Now, how do you replace the steroids? Glucocorticoid, it's replaced by drug of choice as hydrocortisone. Okay. In someone who is not critically ill, hydrocortisone should be given by mouth. It is 50 mg on waking up and 5 mg at around evening. Okay. So always the dose of hydrocortisone should be double or more in the morning and less in the evening. Okay. Then mineralocorticoid is replaced by fludrocortisone, that is by 0.05 or 0.1 mg daily. And androgens, it is predominantly replaced by DHEA, that is 50 mg per day. So first you have to start with glucocorticoids. You have to wait till the patient is gets recovered and can take orally. Okay. Then you have to add mineralocorticoid therapy, that is by fludrocortisone. Okay. Then you have to add androgen if it's necessary. Okay, this is in short about adrenal insufficiency. Adrenal insufficiency is a long answer for you people. So remember causes, how do you types, how do you diagnose, and how do you treat. The next topic is pheochromocytoma. That is also very short. Okay, but that also can come as a long question. Now coming to pheochromocytoma. Pheochromocytoma and paragangliomas are catecholamine-producing tumors that's derived from sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system. The diagnosis of pheochromocytoma provides a potentially correctable cause of hypotension, and the removal can prevent hypertensive crisis that can be lethal. So basically, when do you say the patient is having pheochromocytoma? If this catecholamine-producing tumors is derived from sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system, which is located inside the kidney or basically adrenal gland. If it is located anywhere outside, then we say it's paragangliomas. Okay. Always remember, catecholamines are your epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine. Okay. All the pheochromocytomas produce adrenal more than noradrenaline or epinephrine more than norepinephrine. Only those which are inherited, like in neurofibromatosis or von Payne-Lindau syndrome, MEN2 or MEN1. In those conditions, especially in VH, that is von Hippel-Lindau syndrome, it produces noradrenaline more than adrenaline. Okay, this is in brief. You see the metabolism. Okay, norepinephrine or epinephrine with the help of catechol O methyl transferase is converted into normetanephrine and metanephrine that get sulfated and form normetanephrine sulfate and metanephrine sulfate. Okay, now there are three things we should know. First thing is what is free catechols, what is free metanephrine, what is total metanephrine. Okay, free catechols includes your norepinephrine and epinephrine. Free metanephrines includes your metanephrine and normetanephrine. Total metanephrines includes your normetanephrine and metanephrine plus normetanephrine and metanephrine sulfates, that is sulfated conjugates also includes. So free is your free catechols is your norepinephrine and epinephrine. Okay, free metanephrine is your metanephrine and normetanephrine. The total metanephrines includes your free metanephrines plus sulfated conjugates of metanephrines. Okay, why am I telling this is in serum or in urine you always check for your metanephrines to see whether the patient is having pheochromocytoma or not. Coming to epidemiology, pheochromocytoma is estimated to occur in about 2 to 8 patients out of 1 million per year. About 0.1% of hypertensive patients harbor a pheochromocytoma. The mean age is around 40 years. There is something called rule of tens, which you remember. That is 10% are bilateral, 10% are extraordinal, and 10% are malignant. However, these percentages are higher in inherited syndromes. Okay, pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas are well-vascularized tumors that arise from cells derived from the sympathetic adrenal medulla or parasympathetic, where you have like carotid body or glomus vulgare paragangliom. The name pheochromocytoma reflects the black-colored staining caused by chromaffin oxidation of catecholamines. Okay, the picture what you see, if this is adrenal pheochromocytoma, it occurs in adrenal medulla. Okay. There is extra-adrenal where you see para-aortic or carotid body, or in here you can see here glomus jugulare or carotid body wherever it occurs. Okay. Now coming to etiology, the etiology of sporadic pheochromocytoma and paraganglioma is unknown. However, about 25% of patients can have inherited conditions, which includes germline mutation like RET, VHL, neurofibromatosis 1, SDHB or SDHC or HDHB or SDHA-F2 genes. Okay. Now coming to clinical features, there are many clinical features. The things which you have to remember important are, first they'll have headache, they'll have hypertension, which is basically sustained or paroxysmal. Okay, then you have to remember they can have orthostatic hypertension, they can have dilated cardiomyopathy, they can have elevated blood sugar or hypercalcemia or erythrocytosis. Along with it, they can have palpitations, tachycardia. Okay, now other things what you see is coming again, once again review, top to bottom: headache, sweating attacks, palpitations and tachycardia, hypertension, both sustained or paroxysmal, anxiety and panic attacks, pallor, nausea, abdominal pain, weakness, weight loss, paradoxical response to antihypertensive drugs, polyuria and polydipsia, constipation, orthostatic hypertension, dilated cardiomyopathy, erythrocytosis, elevated blood sugar, and hypercalcemia. Diagnosis based on documentation of excess catechols, either by biochemical or localization of tumor by imaging. Both are equal importance, although measurement of catecholamines is traditionally the first step. Now coming to biochemical investigations, as both secrete and synthesize catecholamines, which includes norepinephrine, that is noradrenaline, epinephrine, that is adrenaline, and dopamine, elevated plasma and urinary levels of catecholamines, and the methylated metabolites, like I have told you, metanephrines and normetanephrines are the cornerstone of diagnosis. Catechols and metanephrines are measured by using different methods. Okay, I'll tell you what methods and how much specificity and sensitivity it is. Now coming to diagnostic methods. Okay, 24 hours urinary, you have to do three things. One is VMA, that is vanillyl mandelic acid. One is catechol, one is fractionated metanephrine. Out of which, the one test which is very specific is VMA. Okay, but which is very sensitive is fractionated metanephrines. So in 24 hours urine, you check three things. One is VMA, one is catechols, one is fractionated metanephrines. One which is very specific is your VMA, which is very sensitive is a fractionated metanephrine. Okay, now coming to other things, that is total metanephrines. Total metanephrines also is very specific. Okay, coming to plasma. In plasma you see two things. One is catechol and free metanephrines. Catechol and free metanephrines are also very sensitive, but not much specific. Okay, the one thing which is very specific in all the investigations, like imaging, like which includes CT, MRI, MIBG scintigraphy, or the somatostatin receptor scintigraphy, which is very specific, is your MIBG scintigraphy. But one which is very sensitive is the CT, MRI. Okay, now coming to like urine test. In urine test, which is very specific, is your VMA, which is very sensitive, is a fractionated metanephrines. Okay, your total metanephrines also can be specific. So specific includes 24 hours urine VMA and total metanephrines. Sensitive is your fractionated metanephrines. That is coming to urine. Now coming to plasma. In plasma, which is very sensitive, is your free metanephrines. There is nothing specific. Now coming to imaging, one which is very sensitive can be your MRI or CT. Okay, one which is very specific is your MIBG scintigraphy. Okay, then other thing is includes your PET scan, that is dopamine PET scan. Okay, by using dopamine PET scan and MIBG scintigraphy, you can diagnose distant metastasis of pheochromocytoma. Okay, pheochromocytoma can metastasize to lung, liver, bone, and other organs via blood. Okay, that can be identified or diagnosed with the help of MIBG scintigraphy and Doppler PET scan. Now coming to differential diagnosis, it can include many differential diagnoses like hypertension, anxiety, cocaine, amphetamine usage, mastocytosis, carcinoid syndrome, intracranial lesions, clonidine withdrawal, autonomic epilepsy, factitious crisis. When an asymptomatic adrenal mass is identified, likely diagnosis other than pheochromocytoma, which includes are your non-functioning adrenal adenoma, aldosteronoma, and cortisol-producing adenoma, like in Cushing's. Now coming to treatment, this is of benign. Okay, I'll tell you what is the treatment for malignant later. Okay, benign includes complete tumor removal is the ultimate therapeutic goal. Okay, you have to give alpha blockers, which includes phenoxybenzamine. Okay, you have to increase salt uptake because they can have hypotension, and hydration is necessary to avoid orthostasis. Alpha adequate blockade is generally required 7 days before surgery. Okay, with a typical final dose of phenoxybenzamine 30 to 20 mg 3 times per day. Then you can give oral prazosin or IV phentolamine can be used to manage paroxysms while awaiting adequate alpha blockade. After adequate alpha blockade, okay, then you have to give beta blockers. Beta blockers can be given 10 mg propranolol 3 to 4 times a day. Okay, then you can plan for surgery. Blood pressure should be consistently below 160 by 90 with moderate orthostasis. Okay, other antihypertensives which can be used includes calcium channel blockers or ACE inhibitors. So treatment, basically tumor removal. Before tumor removal, it is required to start alpha blockers 7 days prior. Okay, you start alpha blockers 2 to 3 days after giving alpha blockers. You give beta blockers. Alpha blockers, whatever you give phenoxybenzamine, phentolamine, and prazosin. Beta blocker you give propranolol. Then you do surgery. Okay, other antihypertensives which can be given calcium channel blockers, ACE inhibitors. Now coming to malignant pheochromocytoma, usually it occurs in about 10 to 5 patients, 5% of patients associated with mutation of RET, VHL, SDHD, SDHB, or SDHC. Okay, distal metastasis occurs to liver, lungs, and bones via blood. The treatment options includes you do tumor mass reduction, alpha blocker for symptoms, nuclear medicine, radiotherapy, chemotherapy, stereotactic radiotherapy. First option is your nuclear medicine radiotherapy. Okay, that is done basically by MIBG scintigraphy scan. So MIBG scintigraphy scan can be used for both the diagnosis and treatment of pheochromocytoma. That is malignant pheochromocytoma. Okay, so first option is your nuclear medicine radiotherapy. Other option includes there's something called Auerbach's protocol. Okay, Auerbach's protocol, 3 drugs which you have to remember are dacarbazine, if it occurs in later part, then you have to manage hypertension. Okay. Always remember, you never give ACE inhibitors or ARBs when the patient is pregnant. So the hypertensive of choice when the patient is pregnant can be a labetalol or alpha methyl dopa. Okay. These both are the or you can give hydrazine also. So these three are your antihypertensives of choice when the patient is pregnant. That is with your pheochromocytoma. So today 2 topics are over. That is adrenal insufficiency and pheochromocytoma. In the next class, I'll try to finish your adrenals. There are 3 very small topics which are to be discussed. One is your Conn syndrome. Then second is your Men syndrome. Then autoimmune polyglandular syndromes. So if these 3 topics are over, then your adrenals is over. Then we start the parathyroid. Okay, that is hyper or hypoparathyroidism. All of you send your attendance in chat box. Okay, if you don't send, your attendance will not be considered.